pure, pristine winter silence. The quiet he had not heard since before they had left Russia. The quiet of his youth, intense and intimidating. Nikolai would normally have welcomed it with a sharp sniff and a deep, satisfying breath, but this morning should not have been so quiet. An expedition with a group of almost 30 men guaranteed that every moment would be filled with some racket or another. He threw the blankets off and stood. His head brushed the top pole of his tent as he opened the flaps. The fire had long since diminished, though wisps of cold ash rose with the gentle breeze, giving the appearance of smoke. The cluster of tents was situated in a circle around the fire, like spokes on a wagon wheel. His tent was the northernmost one, and separated from the others on each side by a few rows of trees. The tents were traditional, 2 vertical poles and a horizontal one resting atop them, with canvas stretched over it and staked into the ground at the corners. Each tent was immaculately placed, perfectly spaced, and set up to look exactly the same. His men were good men, Nikolai knew, and they cared deeply for these small details. But where were they? Why weren't they preparing for their long journey home? "Doctor? Lev?" he called out. He entered the nearest to find the 2 men still asleep beneath mounds of blankets and furs. He kicked at the doctor's cot with an unlaced boot and asked again. Hearing nothing in return, Nikolai pulled the blankets from the man's head. The outermost blanket, a thick woven fabric, caught on something, and he struggled to pull it down. After a more forceful tug, the blanket fell away to reveal the flesh of the doctor's face, eaten by a rash, red boils covering the surface of his skin. Nikolai stumbled backward in disgust. A portion of the skin on the poor man's forehead had stuck to the blanket, glued there by dried tissue and blood. The doctor's eyes were open, but they were glazed over in death. Instinctively, Nikolai clutched a hand to his mouth, struggling to hold back the vomit he felt rising in his throat. He pulled the blanket away completely and found every inch of exposed skin on the doctor's body covered in similar boils. He turned to Lev's cot and made the same cursory examination. More rash, more boils, more death. Lev had also passed some time during the night. Both men lay in their blankets gazing up at the roof of the tent with blank eyes. Nikolai moved away, closed the flap behind him. He looked down at his own hands and arms and noticed the same rash spread and thickened over most of his skin. It was no longer itchy, but he felt the heat radiating from his skin on the places around his body that had been infected. Last night, it was just his hands and arms. Now he felt it over his shoulders, neck, and upper back. He checked 2 more tents, finding the same horrifying faces staring up at him in each. All of his men, all 27 of them, were dead.